Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different now that I have a kind of a day off. Kind of relax over the weekend. I'm going to go over critical race theory or CRT, also known as state sanctioned racism. That's pretty much what it is, or at least that's how it's being implemented through many institutions through the government, whether it's on a local, state, or federal level. And I kind of want to know a little bit more about it. Now, personally, I know it's a terrible idea because from the few examples that I've come across that have been repeating over and over is according to the critical race theory, me being white, I need to say I am a oppressor. I have to go through struggle session and say I am at fault for being born white. Therefore, I need to be punished for something that's out of my control. And that's kind of a theme I'm seeing, especially with some of the people on the left, and it's very discouraging. And also gives a pass to certain minorities to pretty much act like dickheads, pretty much saying, because I'm a minority, I cannot be racist towards white people. And I find that very, very disturbing. So I wanted to go through a little bit more in depth of actually what is critical race theory. Now, this is the one of the first links that have come up with the new discourses.com. 8 big reasons critical race theory is terrible for dealing with racism. Now, I'm under the belief in order to fight racism, we, ha- we have to acknowledge that it's there, but also not really talk about it. We kind of move forward. It doesn't matter the ethnic backgrounds of people, as long as we're able to find common ground and move towards a better future or towards a certain goals. And just by working together, racism in itself is going to work itself out. That's just kind of what I believe. Now, I'm not saying that America or any other country doesn't have their issues with racism, because it clearly does. It's not something to just ignore and toss away. But let's go ahead and read what this site has to say. Unlike, as it seems, a highly obscure academic theory known as critical race theory has completely mainstreamed in society and now everyone is discussing it. While critical race theory has a noble goal of pointing out problems that can be hard to see and maintain or constitute racism, it turns out to be a remarkably bad way about going about this. A little familiarity with the basic principles of critical race theory and how they go wrong can help with this. Before I begin, I want to apologize to the reader. That's kind of funny. Before I begin, that's not a really good way to start off. You know it's going to be terrible. Critical race theory has been growing over the 40 years and has mainly deep problems. I didn't know that this was a 40-year program, to be honest. Didn't realize that this has been going on for that long. Therefore, this is long and still not nearly complete. Here, I documented just 8 of the biggest problems with the entire critical race theory approach. Treat them as 8 short essays on specific topics in critical race theory and digest them one at a time. I offer them in hopes of helping people understand it better so they can decide for themselves if critical race theory is the way we should be dealing with race issues and racism in our society, or if we can generally do better. I think we could generally do better. I think we must acknowledge our past and also acknowledge that where we come from and where we're at today, lots of progress has been made. Since there's so long, here's a too long didn't read bullet point. Critical race theory believes that in the present, in every aspect of life, every relationship, every interaction. Therefore, is an advocate to look for everywhere. Yeah, if you look for racism or if you look for negativity, you're going to find it. I think we need to look for the positive side. And when we look for positive things, we're going to find them and we're going to be better off. It relies on interests, conversion. White people only gave black people the opportunity and freedoms when it's also their own interests, and therefore doesn't trust any attempts to make racism better. I mean, I kind of agree with that. I think we were kind of certain ethnic backgrounds were forced upon that, but I don't think that should be a negative factor. I think the positives that we were able to see the error of our way and we're making progress to make things better for everyone. It's against free society and wants to dismantle them and replace them with something that advocates control. Yeah, I think we should just be free. It only treats race issue as a social constructed groups, so there's no individuals in critical race theory. I mean, the United States was based on individualism and wanting to be separate from the crown. And we also have a term called maverick, which kind of goes on their own. Believes science, reason, and evidence are white way of knowing that the and that the storytelling and lived experience of a black alternative which hurts everyone, especially black people. Yeah, this whole lived experience thing is kind of nonsense. It's almost like redesigning it. Reject all potential alternatives like color blindness as a form of racism, making itself the only allowable game in town, which is totalitarian. Yeah, it seems like it's a control grab, from what I could tell. Acts like anyone who disagrees with it must do so for racist and white supremacist reasons, and even if those people are black, which is also totalitarianism. Yeah, I'm actually seeing a lot of black people speak up about this and being labeled white supremacists or being an Uncle Tom or other racial slurs towards that group as insults. Cannot be satisfied, so it becomes kind of a activist black hole that threatens to destroy everything it is introduced into. I kind of agree with that, man. Critical race theory believes racism is present in every aspect of life, every relationship, and every interaction. Once again, I think if you look for it, you're going to be able to find it. Now, I'm not saying there's actually legit that there's not legit cases of racism, and that is also terrible, and we also should address those. But when you see everything in lens of racism, that's all you're going to be able to see, and it just eats away at your soul. It's kind of like negativity. Once negativity approaches or gets a hold of you, it's really hard to shake it, and you have to force yourself to be positive. And I think that's the only way that we're going to actually get past this whole racism thing. Critical race theory begins as the assumption that racism is an arbitrary part of every aspect of life in our society. Foundation critical race theory scholars Richard D'Angelo and John Stefanik wrote, first, that racism is ordinary and not arbitrarily normal science, the usual way of society does business and common everyday experience of most people of color in this country. On page 7 of the Standard and Documentary textbook on the subject titled Critical Race Theory and Introduction. Or in, Notice that these scholars list the assumption that first among the basic tenet of critical race theory, the introductionary of their book, understand also what that mean by racism isn't even what most people think racism means. This is not prejudice based on race or believing some other race to be superior or inferior to others that they mean by racism, but instead that the system of everything that happens in the society or the social world and beyond that result of any disparity that works in its favor of racial privilege groups on average, or any other racially oppressed person is claiming that they experience racial oppression. These assumptions lead to people to take up critical race theory to look at racism in everything until they find it. That is, after all, the job of a critical theorist or activist to look for the hidden problems that they assume that must be present in whatever they scrutinize. Yeah, it kind of echoes what I'm saying. Where if you look for it, you're going to find it, whether it's there or not. You're going to find it and believe it. In a workplace that adopts critical race theory, this means that it's only a matter of time until someone with a worldview finds out how your entire company and culture is racist. At that point, they will cause a meltdown that forces everyone to take sides and demand a reorganization of the entire, now divided office, culture, and management. In schools, this means teaching our children to think that this way is always be looking be looking for racism in every situation and interaction. In our personal relationship, this means that a friend and even family members, especially our kids who have already been educated with critical race theory ideas that have been incorporated in our schools, will eventually call out each other and reject one another because of the tolerating racism is a considered form of racism, and that would have to be discovered and stopped. I mean, that's pretty scary. Interesting convergence. White people only gave black people the opportunities and freedoms when it's also in their best own interest. I kind of agree with this one, and I kind of don't agree with this one, but let's see what they have to say. One of the founders of the critical race theory, now deceased, scholar of Harvard Law named Derek Bell, made his interest conversion thesis centered to the theory, turning to Diageo and the Stepanik again. Sorry if I'm pronouncing these people's names wrong. The second feature is sometimes called interest conversion or material determinationism, adds a further dimension because racism advances the interests of both white elites materially and the working class people physically. Large segments of society have little initiative or eradicated it. Considered for the example of Derek Bell's shocking proposal, discussed later in the chapter, that Brown versus Board education, considered the great triumph in civil rights litigation, may have resulted in a more self interest of elite whites than the desire to help blacks. This isn't hard to see how paranoid or cynical this ideal is, but it's also horrible when you pause to consider that some of the implications take that demand that also comes from critical race theory that everyone should be a anti-racist. I mean, when I say here anti-racist, that just means what again? This sounds good on the surface, but it's horrible underneath. If someone with racial privilege, including white, Asian, Hispanics, Arab, Indian, and lighter skinned black people, decides to become an anti-racist in accordance with this request, the interest convergence thesis, this would say that only did so to make themselves look good, protect themselves from criticism, or to avoid confrontation of their own racism. This isn't a fringe idea or a possible gap in the concept either. The academic lecture on the whiteness study is filled with the notion, including a book linked treatment by academic scholars, for example, one titled The Good White People that has published in the 2018 by the State University of New York Press. The interest conversion thesis makes this literally impossible for anyone with racial privilege, again as outlined by critical race theory, to do anything right because anything they do right must also have been self interest. If critical race theory makes the demand of people with any form of racial privilege and they comply, they're just making themselves more complicit in racism as critical race theory sees it. By giving these people no way out, critical race theory becomes a deeply manipulative and unable to be satisfied in its list of demands. Almost sounds like a religion. And the more and more I read about this, the more and more I don't like it. This is probably gonna do one more, and I'm probably going to make another video just so it's not an hour-long video. Critical race theory is against free societies. Believe it or not, critical race theory is not a liberal idea, but in fact a critical of liberal societies and against the idea of freedom to its core. Critical race theory sees it as a free society as a way of the structure of maintaining inequalities. By convincing racial minorities not to want to do racial identity politics, since critical race theory exists specifically to agitate for the enable a radical racial identity politics is therefore against free society and how they're organized. In this way, it seems very different that the civil rights movement incorrectly claims to continue. Turning to Delgado and Stepanek, the critical stance about free society and their norm is against the center of critical race theory, and critical race scholars are discontent with liberalism as a framework for addressing Americans' racial problems. Many liberals believe in color blindness and neutral principles of constitutional law, and the famous critique of whiteness educator Robin DiAngelo, author of the now overwhelming famous book White Fragility, puts it even more plainly, writing with a colleague named Oslin Cesare, a widely read educational book called Everyone is Really Equal? Question mark. Or is everyone really? These movements of critical theory, movements upon which critical race theory is based, initially advocates the type of liberal humanism, individualism, freedom, and peace, but quickly turns to rejection of liberal humanism, the idea of individual autonomy that underlies the liberal humanism, the idea that people are free to make an independent, rational decision that has determined their own fate, was viewed as the mechanism for keeping the marginalized in their place by obscuring a larger structure system of inequality. In other words, its free society fooled people into believing that they had more freedom and choice than societal structures that actually allow. In other words, critical race theory sees the free society and the ideas to make them work, individualism, freedom, pace, as a kind of tactic conspiracy theory that we all participate to keep racial minorities down. When its advocate accuses people of being complicit in the system of racism, this is part of what they mean. Obviously, they would prefer that we do not have a free society and would rather arrange society as it sees fit to make us all go along with their ideas. As you can see, this is only 3 of 8, and I'm actually going to end it right there. And I'll probably make another video with the other ones, mainly because I don't want this video to go much longer. Leave a comment down below what your thoughts are, and hopefully we could put the state-sanctioned racism, known as critical race theory or CRT, to bed with all the other bad ideas and why this is bad. Anyways, hope you learned something and have yourself a wonderful day, morning, or evening.